Chapter 2076. Just as she was about to react, she was suddenly pulled away by a strong force. Aya! Jingyu cried out in surprise as the blanket on her body was pulled away. When Jingyu turned her head, her eyes met with Xiao Chen's deep, dark eyes. Jingyu didn't think twice and tried to hide again. However, Xiao Chen wouldn't give Jingyu the chance. He lifted his hand and pulled Jingyu into his embrace. "Let go!" Jingyu struggled angrily. Xiao Chen tightened his grip on Jingyu as he replied firmly, "I won't let go." "Xiao Chen, you bastard!" Jingyu scolded angrily again. Xiao Chen didn't move and didn't let go of Jingyu's body. Jingyu opened her mouth to speak, but Xiao Chen leaned down and covered her mouth with his. Jingyu couldn't struggle. Instead, Xiao Chen hugged her even tighter. The passionate kiss made Jingyu feel dizzy. The lingering kiss seemed to have sucked all the air out of Jingyu's chest. Finally, Jingyu let go of him in her muddle-headed mind. "Are you still angry?" Xiao Chen lifted his hand and caressed Jingyu's rosy lips. His eyes revealed a faint smile. "You?" Jingyu looked at Xiao Chen's expression and felt a wave of anger. She raised her hand and slapped Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen reached out and grabbed Jingyu's wrist. He tilted his head slightly and kissed Jingyu's hand. "I'll take you out." Xiao Chen turned his head and looked at Jingyu. "Huh?" Jingyu felt numb after being kissed by Xiao Chen. Before she could react, she suddenly heard Jingyu's words. She asked in surprise, "Where are we going?" "Let's go." Xiao Chen smiled mysteriously at Jingyu. He pulled Jingyu up and changed into a set of black night clothes. He put on a mask and went out. "We won't be discovered if we go out like this." Jingyu jumped onto the windowsill and looked at Xiao Chen in surprise. "Huh?" When Xiao Chen heard Jingyu's words, he laughed disdainfully. He reached out and grabbed Jingyu's waist and jumped out. Jingyu quickly reached out and hugged Xiao Chen's body. In the darkness of the night, Jingyu and Xiao Chen seemed to have entered and exited the rooftop as if there was no one around. Jingyu and Xiao Chen leaped across the rooftop, and when they landed, they found themselves in an open space. "Where are we?" Jingyu looked around at the desolate scenery. When she turned her head, she saw the bright lights of the town in the distance. "We are still in the town. It's just that there are mountains on 3 sides, and no one is around." Xiao Chen held Jingyu's hand and walked inside. After walking past a patch of reeds that looked very deep, they suddenly saw the light. When they turned their heads, they saw a gurgling stream. "It's so beautiful." Under the moonlight, the stream was sparkling. "How did you know about this place?" Jingyu looked at Xiao Chen in surprise and asked. It was Xiao Chen and Jingyu's first time here, but Xiao Chen was able to find such a place. Jingyu was naturally very surprised. "Xing Shiwu told me." Xiao Chen looked at Jingyu's smiling face, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but smile. "You wanted to tell me this during the day?" Jingyu squatted by the stream. Chapter 2077. Her hands, which were playing with the water, suddenly paused. She raised her head and looked at Xiao Chen. Her eyes shone brightly. "Yes." Xiao Chen looked at the light in Jingyu's eyes. His lips curled into a faint smile as he calmly looked at Jingyu. When Jingyu heard Xiao Chen's reply, she suddenly did not know what to say. Her eyes were calm as she slowly stood up. Her pitch-black eyes silently looked at Xiao Chen. "I'm sorry," Jingyu suddenly said. When Xiao Chen heard Jingyu's words, he looked at Jingyu, who looked like a hurt little wife. She lowered her head in grievance. When Xiao Chen saw Jingyu's expression, his entire body suddenly softened. He lifted his hands and hugged Jingyu without any explanation. He slowly increased the strength he used to hug her silently. Even though he did not say a word, Jingyu deeply understood Xiao Chen's meaning. "In the future, I will learn to understand." Jingyu hugged Xiao Chen back and said seriously, "Yes." When Xiao Chen heard Jingyu's words, the corners of his mouth unconsciously curled into a faint smile. His calm words sounded like a silent satisfaction in Jingyu's ears. Jingyu and Xiao Chen played by the stream. When they were tired, they quietly returned. No one discovered any traces of Jingyu and Xiao Chen. "Master, there's news." This morning, Jingyu and Xiao Chun went out last night. They were woken up by Xing San early in the morning. Jingyu yawned. She supported her head with her hands and looked at Xing San. Then, she turned her head and looked at Xiao Chun. Jingyu and Xiao Chen's work and rest schedule were the same. However, why was it that only Jingyu looked sleepy while Xiao Chun was completely fine? Jingyu felt that she had been dealt a heavy blow. Speak. Xiao Chun sat silently at the side and looked at Xing San. 15 and I have already checked the few strongholds that Miss Qing Shui mentioned. We found human goo worms that have yet to be evacuated. Third Xing's eyes were filled with a deep, dark look as he spoke. The markings here are the locations. Xing San took out the map in his hands. Xiao Chun and Jing Yu's expressions instantly became serious. Continue. Xiao Chun stared at the map in front of him and replied silently. There's still a few locations. However, the people inside have been moved. Moreover, there are no traces of them left behind. We can't find out what was originally here. Xing San said in a deep voice. Based on the traces left behind by the migration, I have only found one location. However, I haven't investigated it in depth. Xing San frowned and said, However, I am certain that this place is definitely an important place. Where is it? Xiao Chun was silent for a moment. Then, he asked with a deep frown. It's right under the foot of this town. Xing San reached out and circled a spot in the town. It was right under the town and not too far away. Jingyu and Xiao Chun stared deeply at the clear markings on the map. Only then did they realize with shock that Madame Ye's power was so great. Just looking at this map was enough to shock people. Jingyu frowned deeply. I know, Xiao Chun responded. He looked up indifferently and said, Spread the news. Chapter 2078. Yes. Third Xing replied respectfully. Of course. Third Xing knew who Xiao Chun was referring to when he told him to pass the news out. Tomorrow is the wedding of the Beijiang tribe's leader, right? Jingyu was listening at the side. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something. She calmly turned her gaze over with a deep look in her eyes as she asked calmly. Yes, tomorrow is the day of the wedding. Everything that needs to be arranged has already been arranged. We have also obtained our identities. Third Xing looked at Jingyu and said respectfully, Very good. Jingyu's eyes were tinged with a faint smile. She seemed to have thought of something and leaned back comfortably. She turned her head to look at Third Xing and said, Go and call everyone here. We have to make the necessary arrangements. That night, Jingyu looked out of the window and couldn't fall asleep for a long time. She looked at the scenery outside the window. She looked at the pitch-black night sky that was pressing down bit by bit. It was so suffocating. Jingyu frowned deeply. Countless thoughts were rolling around in her mind, as if they were settling into a very deep feeling. That kind of emotion made Jingyu fall silent. Xiao Chun. Just as Jingyu was staring at the night sky in a daze, she suddenly felt a familiar embrace around her waist. The deep look in Jingyu's eyes slowly fell silent. Finally, Jingyu slowly closed her eyes. I'm fine. Jingyu's lips curled into a smile. She turned her head to look at Xiao Chun, kissing her neck gently, as if he was comforting her silently. I'm just tired. The look in Jingyu's eyes dimmed little by little. Xiao Chen's hands that were hugging Jingyu tightened a little. Yes, I know. Xiao Chen's steady voice sounded. Jingyu turned around and leaned into Xiao Chen's embrace. She slowly closed her eyes and enjoyed this moment of peace. The next morning, there was a lot of noise outside. The wedding of the leader of the Beijiang tribe was naturally a joyous occasion. Jingyu changed into a very solemn dress and put on a veil. Her body was like a spirit snake, and people couldn't help but look over. Unfortunately, Jing had only put on this dress for a short while when Xiao Chun threw a dark red cloak over and covered her entire body. Jingyu didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she looked at her dress. Xiao Chun was really... Jingyu turned her head and saw that Xiao Chun was also wearing a very revealing dress. Jingyu raised her brows and reached out to put a cloak on Xiao Chun as well. Therefore, when Jingyu and Xiao Chun walked down, the corners of Qinggu, Feng Ling, and the others' mouths twitched. Ninth brother, you guys are already eye-catching enough. If you continue like this, you will be exposed even faster. Qingge was about to go crazy. They were in the wolf's den now. Jingyu and Xiao Chen's strange clothes made them live targets. It's fine. Xiao Chen turned his head calmly and said, "We are going to declare war." Everyone was instantly horrified. Then, why did you have to be so careful in front? You could have just charged into their house, Qingge said with a smile. Xiao Chen's pitch-black eyes narrowed. When he looked at Qingge, Qingji's hair stood on end. He hurriedly said, "Ninth brother, I am doing this for your own good. Enough." Fengyu frowned impatiently. Chapter 2079. She turned to look at Xiao Chen and said, "Don't waste your breath. Xiao Chen is at a critical juncture right now. If Madame Nian notices and retreats, all our preparations will go to waste. Don't tell me you want to start all over again?" Fengyu's words made Xiao Chen frown. Jingyu found it very amusing. It seemed Xiao Chen was famous. Look at all these people talking about Xiao Chen. For some reason, Jingyu felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction as she watched. Xiao Chen's face was still cold. Look at how unyielding he was. All right. In the end, Jingyu smiled and untied the cloak. She pulled the thin veil from the side and wrapped it around her waist. The long, thin veil looked like a skirt, blocking the outside world's gaze. "That's it," Jingyu answered with raised brows and satisfaction. "Okay." Xiao Chen originally wanted to say no, but under Jingyu's warning gaze, he hastily agreed. "Let's go." Qing Shui saw that everyone was ready and set off. They split into several groups and pretended not to know each other. They disguised themselves and snuck into the wedding venue. The loft was truly bustling with noise and excitement. Jingyu and Xiao Chen were in one group. Fengyu and Fengling were in another. Qing Shui and Qingge were in another group. Xing San was hiding in the shadows, and Xing Shiru was with Mo Ru. Mo Ru protested for a long time, but Jingyu told her not to go. She immediately went back to her original position and silently shut her mouth. This place is really luxurious. Jingyu and Xiao Chen stood in the courtyard of the loft with many guests and watched the people coming and going from afar. Xiao Chen sat quietly on the side while Jingyu stood. This situation was like a master bringing a maid out for a trip. In addition to Jingyu's attire, it made everyone understand that these people were hired from somewhere. Looking at these people's ferocious faces, they were simply putting up a lot of face. Jingyu stood obediently on the side, but her eyes were darting around. This wedding was truly grand. However, Jingyu already knew that almost all the guests at this wedding were Madame Ye's people. It looked like a wedding, but the actual event seemed so different. Jingyu's lips unexpectedly turned up in a cold smile. In the midst of the cheering, Jingyu saw a figure appear in the distance. That person is Beijiang's clan head? Jingyu leaned close to Xiao Chen. It looked like they were being intimate, but in reality, she was asking him a question. Immerse. Xiao Chen hugged Jingyu's waist, his palms imperceptibly rubbing against her. Jingyu's lips turned up when she heard that. She watched the man in red striding over. He had deep facial features and looked rather handsome. Jingyu turned her head indifferently and waited quietly behind Xiao Chen. Madame Nia also appeared in front of everyone's anticipation as the wedding proceeded. Jingyu had been waiting the entire time, and she finally saw the moment Madame Nia appeared. Jingyu thought she had controlled herself very well. But the moment she saw Madame Nia appear, her heart suddenly trembled, and monstrous hatred surged forth. Memories of how Madame Nia treated her flashed through her mind. A year of deep sleep. It passed in the blink of an eye, but it was so long. Are you ready to welcome my revenge? Jingyu's eyes were icy and unperturbed. Chapter 2080. Madame Nia appeared surrounded by a group of people. When Jingyu saw this scene, she found it somewhat familiar for some reason. Back then, when Madame Nia controlled Xiao Chen and wanted to marry Nailan Yu, wasn't it exactly like this? Jingyu slowly lowered her eyes, as though she was thinking about something. She suddenly leaned over and whispered into Xiao Chen's ear, "I'm leaving for a bit. I'll be back in a bit." Xiao Chen frowned as though he wanted to stop her, But before he could say anything, he saw Jing Yu silently retreat. No matter how displeased Xiao Chun was, he had to sit there silently. Jing Yu didn't seem to notice anything as she left by herself. However, Qing Ge and the others, who were hiding on the other side, noticed. When they saw this scene, they frowned slightly. When they wanted to chase after her, they discovered that the wedding had already begun, so Qing Ge and the others naturally stayed behind. Jing Yu silently left the venue. She glanced at the loft and hid in a flash. Good heavens! Jing Yu walked through the deserted courtyard and saw some things crawling on the rocks in the forest. She instantly frowned. There were truly a lot of poisonous creatures in Beijiang. Jing Yu retreated. When she saw these poisonous creatures moving in a pattern and then looked around, a faint smile appeared in her eyes. Same old trick. Jing Yu's eyes were icy. She crept into the inner courtyard and took care of a few guards along the way. This backyard was truly deserted. It was the clan head's wedding, so the guards were naturally sent to the front courtyard. Jing Yu flashed into the room. The decorations were quite nice, but Jing Yu's gaze landed on the burning incense burner. Her brows furrowed slightly, and she slowly held her breath. When she reached out to pick it up, her hand suddenly paused, and a cold expression appeared on her face. After a moment of silence, she found a box and sprinkled some things in it. Then, she found a cloth and placed the small incense burner in the box. She carried the box and left. When Jing Yu was about to return, she saw that the wedding had already begun. Jing Yu naturally wouldn't walk over while she was waiting. It would attract too much attention. Jing Yu stood in place. When she turned her head, she seemed to have thought of something. She suddenly climbed onto a beam on one side of the room very briskly. The wild silk on her wrist shot out and firmly nailed itself to the loft on the other side. Jing Yu abruptly leaped over. Her figure flashed by. A faint smile appeared in Jing Yu's eyes as she leaped onto the beam of the attic. Madam? Third Xing was originally squatting on the beam. When he suddenly saw Jing Yu's series of actions and appeared in front of him, he instantly widened his eyes in shock. Did you burn my bow? Jing Yu squatted beside Third Xing. When she saw that Third Xing had taken the bow from his back, a satisfied smile appeared in her eyes. Madam, this is... Third Xing looked at the box in Jing Yu's hands and asked curiously. I don't know what this is either. I took it because it was novel. Jing Yu answered seriously. Third Xing originally thought that this item was something important. He didn't expect that Jing Yu would personally protect it. However, after hearing Jing Yu's words, the corners of his mouth twitched violently. Chapter 2081. Is this the right time to do this? While the wedding was going on, Jing Yu and Third Xing were squatting on the roof beam. Madam, what are you doing? Third Xing asked curiously as he watched Jing Yu fiddle with her bow. Isn't my meaning very clear? Of course. I'm preparing to fight at any time. Jing Yu glanced at Third Xing from the corner of her eyes as she continued fiddling with her bow while observing the changes in the wedding venue. Madame Nia sat on the side of the high seat, looking very happy as she greeted the guests with the elders of the northern border. Then, they saw the Beijiang clan leader holding the bride's hand and bowing to the heavens and earth. Everyone was watching this scene. Jing Yu also stared at the Beijiang clan leader with interest. She looked at the Beijiang clan leader's lifeless face. Jing Yu instantly frowned in confusion. What's going on? From the looks of it, this clan leader of Beijiang must have suffered a lot back then. Just as Jing Yu was watching calmly, she saw a commotion in the crowd. Stop! Just as the clan leader of Beijiang was about to bow to the bride, a small figure suddenly appeared in the crowd. That shout startled everyone and made them turn around. Clan leader, you can't marry this woman. As the crowd parted, a petite figure stood out. That delicate and pretty little face had a pair of extremely determined eyes as she stared straight at the clan leader of Beijiang. Where did this wild girl come from? How dare she disrupt the clan leader's wedding? Someone come. Take her down. Madame Nie's expression changed the moment she saw the woman and looked at the person who appeared. That familiar face. Who else could it be but Qing Shui? Fuck. Jing Yu originally said that she was quietly studying how the clan leader of Beijiang was being controlled, but before she could figure out, Qing Shui suddenly jumped out and said something like that. She was instantly dumbfounded. What's going on? Madam, what do we do now? Xing Sen originally thought that this was Jing Yu's plan, but looking at it now, it seemed like Jing Yu was also quite shocked. What else can we do? Jing Yu gritted her teeth and said, since Madame Nia saw Qing Xue appear, she must have guessed that we're here as well. Since that's the case, why don't we do as she wishes? Third Xing was stunned when he heard Jing Yu's words. Hee hee, I like it this way. Jing Yu chuckled. Her eyes were filled with amusement, but the coldness in the depths of her amusement was clearly visible. The corners of Jing Yu's lips curled up slightly. When she reached out to pick up the longbow, Third Xing immediately frowned. Madam, are you? Third Xing looked at Jing Yu's actions. Before he could finish his sentence, he heard the sound of a bowstring being pulled. Then, without any preparation, he saw the arrow fly out. Assassin! Madame Nye guessed that someone must have arrived the moment she saw Qing Xue. However, Madame Nye didn't expect Xiao Chun and the others to be so daring as to directly kill without any warning. They didn't have the slightest bit of hesitation. The sudden assassination caused the originally quiet venue to fall into a deep silence. Everyone looked around covetously. Chapter 2082. Jing Yu stopped hiding and walked out boldly. The figure standing tall on top of the loft was wearing bright red clothes and holding an ink-black longbow. Just looking at her would make one's heart tremble in fear. Who are you? Madame Nye asked with a frown the moment she saw Jing Yu. Jing Yu's answer was endless silence. Huh. Amidst the silence, a disdainful chuckle rang out from the crowd. Everyone turned to look and saw a tall figure standing up from the crowd. He didn't seem to feel anything when he was sitting down, but when he stood up, he felt an invisible pressure. The man in black seemed to be very silent. The moment Madame Nye saw Xiao Chun, she felt unwell. Her eyes were filled with shock as she stared at Xiao Chun, as though she never expected Xiao Chun to appear here. After the shock, she fell into deep silence, as though she was thinking about something. So it's you, she finally said to Xiao Chun coldly as the coldness in her eyes faded bit by bit. It's me. So what? Xiao Chun saw that Jing Yu was going to kill him, so he naturally didn't hide it anymore. He didn't feel anything when he saw that Madame Nye recognized him, and his eyes were filled with mockery. I was wondering who it was that had the ability to come to my northern border. How dare you come to my northern border? So it's you. When Madame Nye heard Xiao Chen's undisguised voice, her eyes were filled with iciness. Xiao Chun glanced at Madame Nye from the corner of his eyes. He didn't say anything, and his cold expression didn't change at all. This is the helper you ran away from thousands of miles away to invite back? Madame Nye was probably used to Xiao Chen's behavior, so she didn't say anything and turned to look at Qing Xue. You're quite capable. Madame Nye, that's not all. As soon as Madame Nye finished speaking, another voice rang out from the crowd. Madame Nye's expression turned cold. When she turned around, she saw two people emerging from the crowd. I was wondering who it was. So it's the Southern Border's acting clan leader Tang Yutong. When Madame Nye saw that it was Feng Yu and Feng Ling who appeared in front of her, her lips turned up in a very high-pitched smile. May I know why the Tang family head is here? Madame Nye was quite calm. I've heard that the Northern Frontier tribe leader is getting married. Naturally, I'm here to congratulate you. Feng Yu slowly stepped forward. When she heard Madame Nye's words, her face instantly turned dark and cold. Many thanks for family head Tang's thoughtfulness. Madame Nye's expression was extremely unsightly, and her lips curled into a cold smile. But from the looks of it, it seems like the wedding can't go on. Feng Yu's eyes roamed outside as she looked at Madame Nye mockingly. The mockery in her eyes and words caused Madame Nye's expression to change abruptly. Huh, it looks like you don't plan on letting me have an easy time today. Madame Nye naturally knew why Xiao Chun had come this time, so she turned to look at Feng Yu and Xiao Chun, who had appeared. Chapter 2083. That's fine. Since that's the case, then stay. Madame Nye smiled coldly and turned to look at Xiao Chun. Madame Nye, you sure talk big. You actually want to make us stay. Feng Yu frowned deeply a faint smile on her lips. Madam Nye, are you relying on those people you've hidden in the dark? What did you do? Madam Nye's expression changed abruptly. Madam Nye, did you forget? This seat is also from Miaojiang. What's there to hide from those tricks of yours? Feng Yu smiled so amiably, but the smile in her eyes was so cold that it didn't reach her eyes. Feng Yu, what in the world do you want to do? Madam Nye shouted. What I want to do? No, no, no. You should ask her what she wants to do. Feng Yu smiled brightly and turned to look at the figure standing on top of the pavilion. She was wearing bright red clothes and holding a bow. Her face was covered by a veil, so she couldn't tell who she was. Who are you? Madam Nye had long noticed that this person wasn't ordinary, but she didn't know who she was. Now that she heard Feng Yu's words, she immediately turned her gaze back to her. The iciness in her eyes was so grave. Jing Yu looked at the iciness and seriousness in Madame Nye's eyes, and her lips curled up in disdain. She abruptly tightened her grip on the longbow in her hand and pointed the arrow at Madame Nye. Her eyes were frosty as she said, I came to collect a debt from you. The murderous intent in her words was so obvious that the sharp arrow in her hand suddenly shot out, carrying unconcealable resentment and killing intent as it flew toward Madame Nye. Madame Nye's eyes widened when she heard Jing Yu's words. That familiar voice and this arrow brimming with murderous intent made it impossible for Madame Nye to dodge in her days. She pulled a person over almost reflexively and used him to block in front of her. Screech! The sound of the arrow entering flesh made everyone flare up, and the guards in Northern Border's pavilion hastily returned fire. Feng Yu, Xing Shiwu, and the others naturally couldn't wait any longer. Instantly, the wedding became a mess. Madame Nye's eyes filled with panic when she saw the person who took an arrow for her dye. She turned to look at Jing Yu, and her heart thumped violently at the sight of Jing Yu. That familiar name was on the verge of coming out of her mouth. What? Madame Nye? Has she forgotten me? Jing Yu jumped down from the attic. Third Xing held a box in his hands and revealed himself as well. He looked at the scene in front of him calmly. It's you, you didn't die. Madame Nye watched as Jing Yu walked closer. Even though Jing Yu's face was covered, the murderous intent in her pitch-black eyes was so familiar to Madame Nye. You're still alive, so how could I bear to die? Jing Yu smiled and slowly took off her veil. She looked at Madame Nye with a joyful smile. After more than a year, Madame Nye, are you very surprised to see this imperial consort standing alive in front of you again? Why are you still alive? Madame Nye looked at Jing Yu in shock. According to the plan, there was no way Jing Yu was still alive. That was impossible. Jing Yu's life was clearly over. Why was it that after a year, he was actually standing in front of him completely unharmed? Chapter 2084. Why? Ha ha. Jing Yu looked at Madame Nye and said coldly, Why don't you go down and properly ask the King of Hell why he didn't take my life? Clan leader, this is bad. The people from the northern border are attacking. Just as Jing Yu and Madame Nye were talking, they suddenly heard this voice. As soon as this voice rang out, everyone's eyes widened in shock, and the people who were originally fighting immediately stopped what they were doing. You planned this from the start. When Madame Nye heard this, she seemed to have thought of something, and her face abruptly chilled. She looked deeply at Jing Yu and Xiao Chun. Isn't Madame Nye very resourceful? I'm sure. You've already predicted such a small matter, right? Jing Yu's brows arched into a smile. The smile in her eyes was so big that she suddenly felt incomparably comforted when she saw the slight change in Madame Nye's expression with her own eyes. Not good. Not good. The people from the mainland are attacking with an army. Another voice rang out. Only then did Jing Yu completely heave a sigh of relief, and a faint smile appeared in her eyes. What did you say? The people from the mainland? Madame Nye abruptly turned to look at Xiao Chun and Jing Yu. It's the army from the mainland has brought people to kill their way in. There are also many people from Jianghu. Now, those people are all rushing towards the attic. The person who reported the news had a distressed look on his face. He looked like he was about to cry as he spoke. So, this is your objective. Madame Nye said as she stared at Jingyu and Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun strode to Jingyu's side and stood with his hands behind his back as he looked at Madame Nye icily. Did you think I'd let you escape a second time after letting you escape once? I'm your older sister. I've done so much. It's all for your own good. When Madame Nye heard Xiao Chen's words, her heart instantly turned cold. Did you forget that when we were young, we were together? Shut up. Xiao Chen's eyes filled with fury when he heard Madame Nye's words. You're just like that woman, selfish and self-centered, so disgusting that it makes me want to vomit. This king swears he won't be human if he doesn't kill you. Why are you wasting your breath with her? Jingyu reached out and grabbed Xiao Chen's hand and said comfortingly and gently, Aren't you afraid that you can't kill her? Then I'll chop her up and feed her to the dogs. I'd like to see if she can be put back together again. Madame Nye's eyes was a cold Madame Nye. Was Madame Nye. Madame Nye, Madame. Madame Nye's at Nye. Of S. Is. Madame is. T tested out of here. Madame S of S. S's. S's Nis. If S. Madame she's Nis nest to her. To them. Master. Madam. Another voice called out. The face of the black silhouette that had suddenly appeared was the same, and the words it spoke were also the same. However, there was a change in the expression on its face. The two black silhouettes that had suddenly appeared looked travel-worn. They were Interrogation Officer 1 and Interrogation Officer 2, who had chased after them. They hadn't seen each other for a year, but Xing Yi and Xing Er didn't seem to have changed at all. However, there seemed to be a lot of changes. Chapter 2085. Immerse. When Xiao Chun saw Xing Yi and Xing Er's arrival, his expression didn't seem to change, but the gentleness in his eyes was intense. His simple reply seemed to contain 1,000 words. Jingyu also had a faint smile in her eyes. When Xing Yi and Xing Er turned to Jingyu and saw that Jingyu was standing there unscathed, they slowly breathed a sigh of relief. You came at the right time. Where are Su Yu and Linglan? Jingyu nodded at the two of them. It's inconvenient for Linglan to come out due to her health. Su Yu is in the Imperial City protecting the two little masters. Xing Yi turned to glance at Xing Er with a faint smile in his eyes. Xing Er also lowered his head slightly. When Jingyu saw the two of them acting like this, a faint look of surprise instantly appeared in her eyes. Could it be that Linglan is pregnant again? Jingyu asked in surprise. MHM for months. Xing Er's face also had a touch of gentleness. When he said this, his entire person became gentle. Congratulations. Jingyu also had a smile in her eyes. Here. Xing Yi turned to look in the direction of Madame Nye's group and said with a slight frown, Master, Madam, Master Heir Presumptive Master is about to arrive with his troops. Good timing. Jingyu turned to look at Madame Nye and said icily, Today, we're going to make the northern borders disappear forever. We haven't seen each other for a year. Have your martial arts skills deteriorated? Madam, just watch. When Xing Yi and Xing Er heard Jingyu's words, a faint smile appeared in their eyes as they spoke calmly. Jingyu smiled faintly. The battle that had just stopped started again. Madame Nye was both shocked and furious as she ordered everyone to release the goo poison. During the battle, Madame Nye actually grabbed the leader of the northern borders to threaten Jingyu. Stop. All of you stop. If he dares to move again, I'll kill him. Madame Nye roared furiously in a sorry state. Clan leader. Qing Shui shouted in panic when she saw this scene. Jingyu's face also turned cold. Stop. With this shout, the chaotic scene quieted down once again. The people of the northern borders didn't seem to expect Madame Nye to treat their clan leader like this and were stunned. You really couldn't hold back. Jingyu sneered in disdain. She looked at Madame Nye before turning to look at the stunned people of the northern borders and said disdainfully, Do you see this? This is your Madame Nye. Jingyu slowly turned around and looked at these people. Do you know why we came to ruin this wedding? That's because your Madame Nye used goo to control your clan leader. Now, she's forced into a corner and wants to use your clan leader to threaten us. Jingyu smiled disdainfully as she looked at the people outside, their eyes filled with shock. "Shut up!" Madame Nia roared furiously. "Do you know why your Madame Nia is treating your clan leader like this?" Jingyu completely ignored Madame Nia and said calmly, "It's very simple. Because your Madame Nia wants to replace him." "What? How's that possible? What's going on? Why is it like this? Is this true?" After Jingyu said that, all sorts of voices rang out in the surroundings. Everyone's words were filled with doubt. Chapter 2086. Jingyu looked at the ruckus and then at Madame Nia, whose expression had completely changed. "Jingyu, I'm going to kill you." Madame Nia charged over angrily. "Don't be in such a hurry to kill me. How about we take a look at what this is first?" Jingyu reached out with a grin and took the wooden box from Third Xing's hand. She smiled warmly and turned to look at Madame Nia. "What trick are you trying to play now?" Madame Nia's expression was extremely unsightly. When she heard Jingyu's words, her brows furrowed tightly, and her eyes were icy as she asked coldly, "Huh?" Jingyu snorted and opened the wooden box, revealing a small incense burner inside. She handed it to Madame Nia and asked with a smile, "What do you think of this thing? Does it look familiar?" "This is..." Madame Nia was startled when she saw the incense burner that Jingyu took out. "I wonder what would happen if I burned the thing inside?" Jingyu asked with a calm smile. "You can't." Madame Nia's expression changed abruptly, and she hastily said, "Why can't I?" Jingyu was calm. She looked at Madame Nia unhurriedly, as though she didn't care at all. The Beijiang tribe leader, who was under Madame Nia's control, was very calm. "Good stuff." Fengyu took the incense burner from Jingyu's hand and opened it. When she saw the small thing crawling inside the incense burner, she exclaimed in admiration, "Madame Nia is Madame Nia indeed. Only Madame Nia can raise such a perfect mother goo." Fengyu looked up at Madame Nia and said with adoration, "Madame Nia raised this mother goo, using a lot of human blood, right? Look at this luster, TSK, TSK, TSK. So this is the mother goo?" Jingyu asked with interest as she crossed her arms. "Since the mother goo is here, where is the child goo?" That's right, what about the child goo?" Fengyu also pretended to have just remembered. She faintly curved her eyebrows and said, "Look at how perfect this mother goo is. There must be a lot of child goo. Why don't we call them?" "Oh, come on, let's see." Jingyu and Fengyu were singing the same tune. Their words caused everyone's expression to change greatly. Everyone had the same expression. It was unknown what Fengyu had sprinkled into the incense burner. The goo worm suddenly let out a sharp cry. It was really screaming. It sounded like the cry of a bug. On the opposite side, dozens of people from the northern frontier suddenly fell down. Among those dozens of people, there were elders of the northern frontier, as well as some stewards who were in charge of various matters. All of them fell down in an instant. All of them were rolling on the ground in extreme pain. Jingyu watched this scene quietly and said with a calm smile, "Madame Nia, you've really put in a lot of effort to control all of these people just so you can take over the position of clan leader." "What? How could this be? Could it really be Madame Nia? Look at the clan leader. He doesn't have any reaction. He doesn't look like he's been poisoned by a goo. Madame Nia is actually so deranged." After Jingyu's series of actions, quite a commotion arose in the crowd. Madame Nia's face also turned slightly pale. Chapter 2087. What surprised Jingyu was that Beijiang's tribe leader didn't react at all. From the looks of it, this mother parasite wasn't controlling Beijiang's tribe leader. Someone else was controlling Beijiang's tribe leader. "Madame Nia, what do you have to say now?" Jingyu asked calmly when she saw that most of Beijiang's people were starting to look at Madame Nia with suspicion and anger. "Haha, so what if I want to be the tribe leader?" Madame Nia's expression changed a few times. Under the gaze of Jingyu and everyone else, she suddenly burst into laughter and said delightedly, "What right does Gu Heng have to be the tribe leader? He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know anything. If it weren't for me, Beijiang would have been destroyed long ago. But I've been so cautious and conscientious, yet I'm still trapped in a corner of the Northwest. What right does he have?" Madame Nia's eyes were filled with intense anger. Her words made Jingyu, Xiao Chun, and the others furious. If I were the tribe leader, Beijiang wouldn't even have a chance to speak. This Miaojiang is our world, Madame Nye said, her face full of excitement. You really are the one controlling the tribe leader. You want to seize the position. The remaining people standing were the remaining elders. The elders who weren't under Madame Nye's control instantly widened their eyes in shock and anger when they heard this. You got guts. Let go of our patriarch. Angry shouts rang out from all around. Shut up, Madame Nye shouted. I'm doing this for your own good. For Beijiang's good. For Beijiang's good. You're pushing Beijiang into the teeth of the storm. What a joke. You're just using this name to expand your power. That elder shouted angrily. Madame Nye was so angry that her face and neck were red. How fun. Jingyu reached out to play with the box. When she saw Madame Nye's reaction, she suddenly found it funny and said, I wonder what would happen if I accidentally threw this mother parasite into a brazier. Then they'd all die, Fengyu said with a sidelong glance at Jingyu. Really? Jingyu rubbed her chin and said, Fengyu, do you know that there are many types of mother and child parasites? Jingyu's sudden words startled Jingyu. Then she seemed to have thought of something, and her eyes suddenly widened. Before she could say anything, Jingyu suddenly threw the box in her hand into the brazier. The Madame Nye's words. Madame Nye. Madame Nye's reaction. Madame Nye's words. Madame Nye. Fengyu knew this would happen, but she didn't expect Madame Nye to suddenly collapse the moment the goo was thrown into the brazier. Her face instantly paled, causing Fengyu to widen her eyes in shock. Could it be that this mother goo was raised with Madame Nye's blood? Fengyu exclaimed in surprise. It looks like that's the case, Jingyu said calmly as she looked at the scene in front of her with slightly arched brows. PFFF. Madame Nye spat out a mouthful of blood, and she instantly became dispirited. She knelt on the ground, her face deathly pale. Jingyu. Madame Nye looked up and stared at Jingyu. Her tone was heavy with gritted teeth. Chapter 2088. She looked at Jingyu as though she wanted nothing more than to swallow Jingyu alive. Madame Nye fell to the ground, her face terrifyingly pale. When Jingyu, Xiao Chun, and the others saw Madame Nye like this, the outside world sank into silence, as though everything had calmed down. You think you've won just like this? Madame Nye looked at Jingyu with a ghastly pale smile on her lips. She looked even more frightening. Jingyu was silent as she looked at Madame Nye. When she turned to look at Madame Nye, Jingyu's heart suddenly skipped a beat as though she thought of something else. Her expression instantly turned unsightly. What do you mean? Jingyu stared at Madame Nye with shock on her face. She watched as Madame Nye propped herself up and stood up. Her expression seemed to be resolute about something. How is it? Madame Nye looked at Jingyu with a smile. Do you know fear now? Jingyu didn't say anything and continued to watch quietly. You really think you've won? You think you've won just because you killed me? Jingyu looked down calmly at Madame Nye. Her heart constricted, and a faint smile appeared on her face. Ha ha! Jingyu, you've lost. You'll never win against me. Madame Nye shouted angrily. Her deranged appearance made Jingyu's heart flutter, and the expression on her face changed bit by bit. What did you do? Jingyu asked. You led an army to Miaojiang from thousands of miles away. You think I'm your only enemy? Madame Nye smiled disdainfully. I did lose, but you lost even more miserably. Ha ha! Madame Nye laughed maniacally as though she was making a final struggle, but also so silent. A faint smile appeared in Jingyu's eyes. Do you think that I'll let you live just because of this? Jingyu slowly suppressed the shock in her heart and said in a low voice, I never thought of that. Madame Nye smiled at Jingyu. I just wanted to say, you brought all your troops here, but now you're facing me here. Don't you think you've forgotten something? Jingyu furrowed her brows as though she thought of something, but also seemed to have forgotten something. Her deep frown caused Xiao Chun, Fengyu, and the others to frown as well. Kill your way in. At this moment, a loud shout came from outside. Countless soldiers surrounded the pavilion. The figure on the horse had a cold expression on his face. Jingyu looked at this scene and slowly relaxed her brows. Dad! Mother! The figure that came down from the horse looked very emotional. Xiaobai. Jingyu looked at the youth who was taller than her in the blink of an eye. A faint smile appeared on her face as she called out calmly. Mom! Xiaobai looked at Jingyu. When he saw Jingyu standing quietly by his side, a very gentle look appeared on his face. You're here. Jingyu smiled. I'm here, Xiaobai replied. While Jingyu and Xiaobai were reminiscing about the past, they suddenly saw a figure rushing over in a hurry. The figure rushing over was even more frightening. Chapter 2089. Xing Yi turned around and saw that it was Su Yu's man. Not good. Palace Master. The man rushed to Xing Yi and said in a panic, Something happened. What happened? Speak slowly. Interrogation Officer 1 looked at the person who had come, and his expression changed for an instant as he asked in a low voice. Madam sent a letter. This person placed the letter in his hand in front of Interrogation Officer 1. Interrogation Officer 1 reached out to receive it with a cold face and quickly scanned through the contents of the letter. However, after reading the contents of the letter, his entire face instantly changed. This is... Xing Yi's hand trembled, and he looked at Jingyu and Xiao Chun in fear. What's wrong? Jingyu looked at Xing Yi's expression and asked uneasily. Master, madam, something happened. Xing Yi's Adam's apple moved slightly, and he said in a low voice. Speak. Xiao Chun replied. Something happened in the imperial city. Xing Yi took a deep breath and said, The second prince, Xiao Jingran, led an army to rebel. Qin Bai is among them. Xiao Jingran. Jingyu's heart trembled when she heard this, and she frowned in fear. Yes, Xing Yi replied and continued. The situation is serious. Miss Shangguan and the Empress are both injured. The two young masters are missing. Jingyu's eyes widened when she heard Xing Yi's words. What did you say? After a moment of silence, Xiao Chun asked in a gloomy voice. Master. Xing Yi lowered his eyes and said again, The two young masters, haha. At this moment, Madame Nia suddenly burst into laughter. Her laughter was so shocking that Jingyu abruptly turned to look at her. When she saw Madame Nia's expression, she suddenly started laughing. It's you. This was your plan? Jingyu looked at Madame Nia calmly and said indifferently, This was what you wanted to do. You were stalling for time. It was you. Ha ha. You didn't expect it, did you? Jingyu, you finally have a day like this. Madame Nia laughed happily. So what if it was me? Madame Nia looked coldly at Jingyu and said, Are you satisfied now? It seems Xiao Jingran is quite capable. Madame Nia's smile was so smug that she didn't see Jingyu's silent appearance. Jingyu's pitch-black eyes darkened bit by bit, and the look in her eyes was so terrifying. Jingyu looked at Madame Nia silently and emotionlessly. It was as though Madame Nia's words couldn't move Jingyu's heart at all. She just watched silently. Very good. It's because of my benevolence that you've been so arrogant time and time again. Jingyu suddenly laughed after watching for a long time. Why? Why is it so never-ending? At this moment, Jingyu felt an indescribable sadness and anger surging from the depths of her heart. She thought about everything she'd experienced along the way. Jingyu suddenly laughed happily. I don't want to kill people, but I have no choice but to kill. Jingyu slowly raised her head. She thought about how her father looked when he died, how he looked when he was forced out of Dongqing, and how her two children looked when they were born. At that moment, hot tears suddenly fell from Jingyu's eyes. The tears on her face were so deep. Chapter 2090. Why? Bringing me to this world, I still have to encounter so many things. Why? The world is like this. Why would I want to change it? Jingyu suddenly laughed, her laughter getting louder and louder. Under the clear sky, Jingyu's sorrowful appearance fiercely hit everyone's chest. Everyone clicked their tongues as they saw the change in Jingyu. The wind suddenly blew. The world. What does it have to do with me? Jingyu's pitch-black eyes were rolling. as if there was a special emotion that filled the air in an instant. Ha ha! Jingyu laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. In the sky, the birds flapped their wings and fluttered, the horses of the army neighed, and the snakes and rats that were hiding under the ground suddenly came out. The crowd on the street was in an uproar, completely shocked by the sudden appearance of the scene. The usually docile kittens and puppies suddenly began to howl crazily, causing everyone on the street to fall into a state of panic. It was not only the Miaojiang that fell into such a state, the cities in the outside world seemed to have a chain reaction at this moment. In all the cities, all the people and all the animals were in an uproar. In the depths of the Roman forest, two slumbering gray wolves suddenly opened their eyes. The two gray wolves suddenly got up, turned their heads, and looked in the direction of the cold forest. As if they felt a call, the two gray wolves suddenly got up and rushed towards the high mountain rocks. A wolf! A clear wolf howl broke the silence in the forest. After this wolf howl sounded, a series of echoing wolf howls suddenly sounded from all around. There was a commotion in the forest. This time, the commotion was bigger than any of the previous times. Various howls rang out. Everyone's eyes were tinged with a faint smile. At this moment, it was as if they had received some kind of summons. They abruptly rushed into the forest. Even the gentle rabbit had a ferocious look on its face. These people who were originally hunting in the mountains would never have imagined that a beast horde would appear in such a place. Moreover, there were so many figures rushing out. The entire world was in chaos. On this day, countless monks, sorcerers, and Taoists looked at the sky in panic, saying that the world was in chaos and that it was going to be overturned. All the beasts in the forest, regardless of whether they are birds or beasts on land, all of them rushed out of the forest and headed in one direction. That direction is the Tokyo Imperial City. In Miaojiang, Jingyu stood in the same place. Around her, there were many mice and other things. Those poisonous snakes all surrounded Jingyu's feet. Jingyu lowered her head as if she didn't notice them at all. Jingyu stood there, and everyone's eyes fell on Jingyu. "You are." Xiaochen slowly took a step forward and calmly called out. Jingyu's silent body moved slightly, and she slowly raised her head. She slowly opened her eyes, and under everyone's gaze, her pair of black eyes turned into a dazzling golden-green color in an instant. It was such a familiar color, but it seemed to be even more translucent. Xiaochen, Jingyu's eyes were still, and she looked at Xiaochen with eyes as gentle as water. Chapter 2091. Xiaochen looked at Jingyu and smiled warmly. Jingyu was surrounded by snakes and rats, but Jingyu stood in the middle and looked at Xiaochen from afar. The surrounding people saw this strange scene. They watched as the snakes and rats circled around the crowd, as if they had heard some order and gathered in a dense crowd. No one had expected such a scene to occur at this moment. Jingyu, Madam, Nia looked at Jingyu's appearance, and the creatures gathered on the ground, and her eyes widened in fear. Everyone turned to look at Jingyu's eyes, which had turned golden green once again, with astonishment in their eyes. Didn't the rumors on this continent say that the abnormal pupils would disappear after they were passed down to their children? Why did Jingyu's abnormal pupils appear again now? And from the looks of it, they seemed to be even stronger than before. Screech! At this moment, a very clear cry rang out in the sky. When the crowd heard this sound, they immediately looked up in fear and saw that in the sky, a huge, fierce eagle had suddenly appeared. That's Qinggu, Xing Yi, and the others naturally recognized it. The moment they saw the fierce eagle appear, their eyes widened. Screech! Screech! The screech rang out. When everyone looked up, they saw a whole flock of fierce eagles appear outside. That black mass suddenly covered them. Almost in an instant, the entire sky above the northern frontier was covered. The screeching sounds were so frightening. Everyone stared with their eyes wide open. Qinggu, Interrogation Officer 1, and the others probably did not expect such a scene to happen either. Instantly, all of their eyes were filled with terror. The difference between the heavens and the earth was so great. However, the person who caused this had a calm expression. Jingyu stood in the same spot without moving at all. She just looked at Xiao Chun quietly, without any emotion. Xiao Chun, I want to go save the child, Jingyu suddenly said to Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu silently. He saw how heavy the darkness in Jingyu's eyes was. Those familiar golden-green eyes were filled with unwavering and incomparable worry. Okay, Xiao Chun nodded. The emotions in those deep, dark eyes were almost the same as Jingyu's. He just looked at Jingyu. After hearing Xiao Chen's answer, Jingyu smiled happily. She turned to look at the sky and shouted. A sturdy Humvee flew down and stopped steadily in front of Jingyu. Jingyu flipped onto the Humvee without hesitation. She stood on the Humvee and looked at Madame Nia, who was lying on the ground. She suddenly felt disgusted. Xing, chop her up, Jingyu ordered coldly. The disgust in her voice was so obvious. Yes, Xing Yi replied. He couldn't hold it in any longer. Madame Nia looked at Jingyu's figure and instantly widened her eyes in horror. She said in horror, No, you can't kill me. I know where the child is. If you kill me, then, screech. Before Madame Nia could finish her sentence, she saw an arrow firmly embedded in her chest. Chapter 2092. The black arrow pierced through Madame Nia's heart just like that. Let's burn down this pavilion. Jingyu turned to look at Xiaobai. The ruthlessness in her eyes was frightening. Her calm eyes looked at the surroundings of the loft quietly. When a monstrous fire started burning, there was an empty space in the loft that was littered with minced corpses. A nest of rats was furiously eating the flesh. It was a horrifying scene. Everyone looked at this scene as if they were looking at something extremely disgusting. Their stomachs were churning, but they slowly turned their heads and didn't say another word. Under Jing Yu's attack, Nanjiang's army entered the northern borders and occupied the northern borders almost instantly. This day was the most magnificent day in the history of Miaojiang. That black mass of ferocious eagles, Jing Yu, suddenly flew into the sky. Everyone probably did not expect that this day would be like this. The thousands of soldiers and horses watched helplessly as Jing Yu left. Xiao Bai and the rest killed all the resistance in the northern borders. The loft was burned to the ground, and the goo worms were all dead. Xiao Bai stood outside the loft with a monstrous fire behind him. Xiao Bai looked up at the sky and saw the fierce eagles flying into the distance. Crown Prince, 11th Interrogation Officer, stood beside Xiao Bai and called out quietly, If anything happens to my two little brothers, Mother Shi. Xiao Bai suddenly fell silent halfway through his words. His expression was so calm, but it also seemed like he wasn't calm at all. Xiao Bai sighed deeply. What do we do now? Interrogation Officer 11 followed Xiao Bai's gaze and turned to ask. Xiao Bai turned around when he heard that and saw a group of soldiers supporting a person out not far away. Xiao Bai looked at the person who was tortured beyond recognition, then at the wounds on the person's body. His gaze shifted to the person's face. This is the person Miracle Physician Valley Master is looking for, right? Xiao Bai smiled calmly and waved his hand. Bring the person to Qingge. No matter what, we have to find out where Madame Nia took the people in the basement. Yes, the group of guards replied respectfully. Jingyu left with Xiao Chun. The rest of the people stayed in Miaojiang and figured out all the things in Miaojiang. They found what Xiao Bai was looking for in a manner. The people who found this place were Feng Yu's people. Xiao Bai looked at the manor and the things that were revealed in the back of the mountain. Iron cages could be seen in the mountains behind the manor. Inside these cages were people who were sprawled on the ground. Their eyes were filled with despair as they reached their hands out of the cages. On their bodies and arms, there were streaks of blood. Their flesh and blood were covered with densely packed white insect eggs. Some of them had already taken shape, and each of them was white and tender, looking very frightening. Xiao Bai looked at this scene and the people in the iron cages. They opened their mouths wide as if they wanted to call for help, but upon closer inspection, they realized that these people's tongues had all been cut off. They were all locked in the iron cages like corpses. This was a kind of vessel that turned living people into vessels for raising venomous insects. Chapter 2093. They won't be able to live. Burn them. While Xiao Bai was watching silently, he heard a voice beside him. It turned out that Feng Yu and Mo Ru were also standing on the other side of the mountain rock. They were watching the scene in front of them and spoke in a very sorrowful manner. Brother Mo, you're a genius. These people's bodies have been taken over by the eggs. The eggs can't be removed. If you're not careful, it's possible for the eggs to burrow into your brain. Then, you won't be able to save them, and they'll die an even more painful death. Feng Yu lowered her eyes slightly and said, since they're going to die anyway, why don't we give them a quick death? Feng Yu turned her head sadly, and Mo Ru didn't know if it was because she was thinking of something or because she was deeply moved by this thing, but Mo Ru could clearly feel that Feng Yu was in a very bad mood. After Feng Yu found this manor, she found another 3 or 4. The scenes inside were almost exactly the same as this one. Fortunately, when she found the 4th manor, it seemed like it was just the beginning. Those dozens of people could still be saved. In the northern border, there was a huge fire burning everywhere. It was unknown how many worms and people had died. Feng Yu stood on the streets of the northern border. She raised her head and looked at the spreading fire. In her pitch-black eyes, there was an incomprehensible confusion. When Xiao Bai looked over, he saw a petite figure standing at the end of the street. For some unknown reason, that figure suddenly caused Xiao Bai's heart to violently tremble, while a different emotion flickered in his eyes. This is where you live? Feng Yu was lost in thought when she suddenly heard a voice beside her ear. She was so shocked that her body trembled. She took a step back vigilantly and turned around to look at the person in front of her with narrowed eyes. It's you. When Feng Yu saw that the person who appeared beside her was Xiao Bai, she was stunned. Then, she asked curiously, what are you doing here? Whatever you're doing, I'm doing the same. Xiao Bai calmly replied. After the two of them finished speaking, they both frowned and quietly looked at each other. In the blink of an eye, it felt like they hadn't seen each other for a long time. When the two of them looked at each other, they seemed to be a little stunned. Why did the other person change so much? Xiao Bai carefully looked at Feng Yu's eyebrows. In a trance, he felt that Feng Yu seemed to have become more beautiful, but it also seemed like something was missing. Looking at Feng Yu's faint eyebrows, it seemed like they were dyed with a sense of confusion. You came at the right time. I have something to tell you. Feng Yu looked at Xiao Bai for a moment, as if she didn't want to look at him any longer. She said, now in Miaojiang, there is no distinction between north and south. Miaojiang has become one. Now, I want you to pass a message to the emperor of the continent. Feng Yu turned her head very indifferently and looked at the scenery in the distance. She said very quietly, Miaojiang will become a subsidiary of the mainland from now on. We will never invade the mainland and will not let the goo worms leak out. As a condition, I hope that the emperor of the continent will give us fertile land and suitable cities to live in. As you can see, this place is not suitable for living, Feng Yu said very calmly. She replied indifferently. All right. Xiao Bai pondered for a moment and then nodded. Chapter 2094. Feng Yu's request was not excessive. This was very normal. Xiao Bai naturally agreed. Even if Feng Yu did not say it, Xiao Bai would have told the emperor of the mainland. If you can do it and let the people of Miaojiang live a prosperous life, I can guarantee that there will be no conflict between Miaojiang and the people of the mainland. What you saw today will be buried as a taboo, and the next generation will not know about it. From now on, Miaojiang will only be Miaojiang, a subsidiary of the mainland. Feng Yu turned her head and looked at the dilapidated street. After experiencing the baptism of war, some of the girls sitting on the street had lifeless eyes. Xiao Bai looked at Feng Yu. His gaze was slightly complicated, but he remained silent and did not speak. The two of them stood there silently. Since when did the two of them begin to interact with each other? From those insignificant arguments to this kind of conversation, solemn and formal, so silent and calm. In a trance, he seemed to recall the first time they met. On the ship at sea, they were fooling around without restraint, laughing without a care in the world, as if there was no sorrow in the world. They were clearly quarreling, but at the same time, they seemed inseparable. He still remembered that before the mountains and rivers, the young man in black sitting on the stone looked at him seriously and said that he would take him to the bottom of the sea. And now, the unfamiliarity they felt when they first met, and the words they spat out were carefully considered over and over again. They were no longer talking about trivial matters. Instead, it involved too much of the country and the world. They were clearly looking at each other seriously, but it was as if there was a bottomless abyss in front of them. See how terrifying the people of Miaojiang are. Feng Yu lowered her eyes little by little. The words that came out of her mouth were inexplicably sad. After Feng Yu finished speaking, she suddenly fell silent, then turned her back to Xiaobai and said, "Take your people and leave. From now on, Miaojiang is a forbidden area. No one can enter and no one can leave. From now on, we will never meet again." This was the last sentence that Feng Yu left. Xiaobai quietly watched Feng Yu leave. As she walked away step by step, Xiaobai suddenly had an idea. He wanted to rush up and grab Feng Yu, but for some reason, he did not go forward. If Xiaobai knew that his hesitation this time would be 10 years away. At this moment, he would definitely grab hold of Feng Yu regardless of the consequences. However, Xiaobai didn't reach out his hand. In Miaojiang, there was a complete reshuffle. Feng Yu had killed countless people. She had killed too many people without any care or concern. The evil reputation of the witch had been thoroughly established this time. However, Feng Yu is not the Miaojiang tribe leader. Big Brother Ling, if I become the clan leader, I will kill everyone. After saying that, Feng Yu left. It was as if she had hidden deep in the mountains. Killing had become her second nature, and she had gone mad. Feng Yu locked herself in a high mountain and never showed her face again. The changes in the world were most noteworthy. Naturally, Jingyu and Xiaochan were outside. The 9th Emperors and the 9th Imperial Concubine, who had shocked the world, had really shocked the world this time. In the imperial city of Tokyo, the Emperor, the Empress, and a group of ministers were all locked up in the dungeon. The person sitting on the dragon throne was Xiao Jingran. Chapter 2095. There was a handsome man in white sitting next to Xiao Jingran. Who else could it be but Qinbai? Jingyu's strange pupils have appeared. The two men sitting on the high seats had grave expressions on their faces. They looked at each other and said the same thing. "Are you afraid?" When Qinbai turned his head and saw Xiao Jingran's ugly expression, he asked with disdain. Xiao Jingran glanced at Qinbai from the corner of his eyes and said, "Aren't you the high priest of the Holy Family? Didn't you say that the strange pupils would not appear after the inheritance was passed down? What is the meaning of this? Why did it turn out like this?" Xiao Jingran's face was filled with cold anger, and his black eyes seemed to be filled with anxiety. It was obvious that Xiao Jingran was anxious. On the astrolabe, Jingyu's fate energy has clearly disappeared, and her strange pupils have indeed shifted. That 1-year-old child has a pair of dark green eyes. Qinbai took a deep breath and said, "This is all I know. In history, there has never been two people with strange pupils in the same world. Is it possible that this strange phenomenon was caused by that child?" Xiao Jingran frowned deeply. Xiao Jingran was naturally aware of what Qinbai said. "Your Majesty, do you believe your own words?" Qinbai smiled disdainfully. He stood up and said, "She has returned. The mysteries of the heavens are messed up. Life and death are unknown." Qinbai stood up. After leaving those words behind, he left. Xiao Jingran sat on the dragon throne as his hand caressed the dragon throne. Suddenly, he furiously raised his hand and instantly threw the things on the table onto the ground. His eyes were filled with pain as he tightly clenched his fists. Xiao Jingran had not even warmed the dragon throne when he heard such news. He seemed to have already known the outcome. Qinbai walked step by step in the Tokyo Imperial Palace. When he stepped out of the main hall, he saw a young man walking quickly towards him. That familiar face and upright figure seemed to be waiting for Qinbai. "Master." The young man was very handsome. His originally crisp voice was now hoarse and carried a unique charm of a man. It was a young man from the Holy Family, Zuan Yes. Qinbai looked at the young man who was now as tall as him and nodded slowly and calmly. "Your Majesty, Did you summon Master to ask about the beast's upheaval a few days ago? Xuan's eyes were cold, and there did not seem to be any emotions. The gentle young man from back then seemed to have disappeared. Yes. Qinbai answered again, but he only answered. He did not say anything else. Qinbai turned around and walked along the corridor. He looked at the bricks and tiles and suddenly stopped. His white robe was very conspicuous. His deep eyes looked at the long corridor and said, "She must have walked here before, right? Master, who are you talking about?" Xuan was stunned when he heard Qinbai's words. Nothing. Qinbai smiled and shook his head as if he did not care. He turned to look at Xuan and asked, "Xuan, are you afraid of death?" "Master, I've already died once. What's there to be afraid of?" Xuan smiled disdainfully. Chapter 2096. Is that so? Qinbai smiled silently after hearing Xuan's answer. He turned around and said, "But I'm afraid of death. I'm afraid that I'll die in her hands." Xuan was stunned when he heard Qinbai's words. At this moment, he thought of the person buried deep in his memory. He instantly knew that the previous sentence was from Qinbai. Who was the person who walked this path? It turned out that Master was talking about her. The woman who smiled at him like a flower. She was so warm and encouraging him, but she also ruthlessly slaughtered everyone. The temperature in Xuan's eyes gradually turned cold. He silently looked at Qinbai and saw that Qinbai's figure was getting further and further away. His eyes fell silent for a moment. He stood up and quickly followed up without saying a word. The two of them walked further and further away. They walked to the high platform. Qinbai raised his head and looked at the sky. It looked like he was studying something, but it also looked like he was in a daze. He was not thinking about anything. "Xuan, do you see anything?" Qinbai stared at the sky and asked calmly. "Chaos." Xuan followed Qinbai's gaze and said with a frown. The celestial phenomena were all messed up. Xuan could only see chaos. He could not distinguish the fate and could not see anything. The sky seemed to be broken into nothingness. "Is that so?" Qinbai lowered his eyes faintly. The silence in his eyes seemed to contain some other emotions. "Master, do you see anything?" Xuan looked at Qinbai and asked in puzzlement. When Qinbai heard that, he calmly shook his head. He did not say a word. Of course, Qinbai was not going to say anything. In the sky, he saw a very thick death air. That death air was pointing at him. His death tribulation. It's coming. The figure standing on a high platform was silent and calm. Qinbai's words made Xiao Jingran uneasy. The soldiers in the palace were all Xiao Jingran's men. The other soldiers had been sent to Miaojiang. Clearly, all of this had been planned beforehand. Xiao Jingran's men were all in the palace. At this moment, the only army in the imperial city was the one stationed at Jade Pass. They were Hao Yu's men. This army had already arrived at Yellow City from Jade Pass. However, they could only stop outside the imperial city and didn't dare to enter. This was because the emperor, empress, and a group of ministers were all under house arrest. If Hao Yu launched an attack, not only would he not be able to save the emperor, but he would also lose his life. That would be terrible. Therefore, Hao Yu's soldiers and horses were now stationed outside the imperial city. They kept sending messages, asking the soldiers and horses to come back quickly. Hao Yu sighed deeply and frowned slightly. Hao Yu had been staying in Jade Pass for such a long time. Hao Yu only found out about the matter between Jing Yu and Xiao Qin later. When he heard that Jing Yu had passed away, Hao Yu was shocked for a long time. During this period, he came back once but did not see anyone. Then he went back. He did not expect that this time he would come back because of this matter. Looking at the imperial city, Hao Yu's army was now stationed at the foot of the mountain outside the imperial city. Jing Yu looked at this scene and narrowed her eyes very calmly. Chapter 2097. Sir, there are movements in the imperial city. Hao Yu was studying the map in the tent when he heard the shouts coming from outside. Hao Yu immediately turned his head and frowned. Hao Yu clearly knew that the news that came now was definitely not good news. In the imperial city, there are two young masters from the prince's residence. The guard said with a conflicted expression. What did you say? Where are the young masters from? Hao Yu's eyes widened slightly as he asked curiously. The young masters from the prince's residence, the 9th emperor's and the 9th imperial concubine's young masters. The guard said seriously. After Hao Yu heard this, his heart trembled violently. He suddenly stood up and rushed out of the tent. This was no laughing matter. The 9th emperor's sons, 2 of them. After Hao Yu went out, he immediately saw a tall platform built on top of the imperial city. Below the platform was a pile of firewood, and at the top of the platform was a sharp knife. The 2 children were sitting on the wooden planks. Hao Yu gasped when he saw this scene. Xiao Jingran actually wanted to kill Xiao Qin's sons in front of everyone. At this moment, Hao Yu deeply felt that Xiao Jingran was crazy. He was sending himself to his death. Xiao Chun was rushing back. If he saw this when he returned, Hao Yu did not dare to think about it. Go and see what Xiao Jingran is trying to do. Hao Yu turned his head sideways and said to the guard beside him, "Yes." The guard hurriedly responded and went to investigate what was going on in the imperial city. In the imperial city, Qin Bai also received the news. After hearing about Xiao Jingran's actions, Qin Bai's eyes flashed with surprise for a moment before he slowly recovered. Xiao Jingran has nowhere to go. Qin Bai silently sat down and lowered his eyes. He said, "But this is not the best way." When Zhuan heard Qin Bai's question, he was momentarily stunned. He then turned to look at Qin Bai and asked, "Master, do you want to go? Let's go." Qin Bai stood up and calmly lowered his head. With steady steps, he walked out of the palace. The moment he stepped out of the palace, he could see that the number of guards in the palace had greatly decreased. Qin Bai didn't need to think to know that these people must have been summoned to the other side. When Qin Bai arrived at the entrance of the palace, he saw the high platform, the pile of firewood surrounding it, and the bayonets hanging above the heads of the 2 children. His dark eyes wrinkled deeply. "Master," Zhuan's heart skipped a beat when he saw the bayonet dangling above the 2 children's heads. He turned to look at Qin Bai in astonishment. When Qin Bai heard Zhuan's voice, he naturally knew what Zhuan was trying to say. However, Qin Bai remained expressionless. "She's not dead," Qin Bai suddenly said. "This is probably the fastest way to see her." "Master." Zhuan's heart trembled violently when he heard this. He glared at Qin Bai and shouted, "I know." Qin Bai frowned. The shock in Zhuan's eyes was obvious. He called out to Qin Bai because he wanted to remind Qin Bai who caused them to become like this. Chapter 2098. How could Qin Bai forget? Come, let's go up. On the other side of the high platform, Xiao Jingran was seated in a serious manner. His eyes were calm as he stared into the distance, as though he was quietly waiting for something. "You're here." When Xiao Jingran saw that Qin Bai had arrived, his expression did not change as he continued to stare Qin Bai. Qin Bai was wearing white clothes. He stood in front of Xiao Jingran and calmly asked, "Have you thought about the consequences of doing this?" "Yes, I have." Xiao Jingran answered seriously as he looked at Qin Bai and said, "But I still want to try and see if I will lose." "Huh." When Qin Bai heard Xiao Jingran's answer, he suddenly laughed. Qin Bai did not say anything else as he turned around with his back facing Xiao Jingran. He also stared at the sky door in the distance as he quietly narrowed his eyes. In his daze, he seemed to have heard something else. It was a very strange sound, but he also seemed to have misheard it. Qin Bai was slightly dazed. Just as Qin Bai was in a daze, he suddenly saw the cup on the table vibrating. "What's going on?" Just as Xiao Jingran was about to ask, he felt the tremors coming from the ground. The tremors were so terrifying that Xiao Jingran stood up in fear. "Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" A very anxious voice called out. "I'm coming! I'm coming!" That guard almost ran away in a hurry and directly fell in front of Xiao Jingran. His entire body was trembling, and no one knew what terrifying thing he had seen for him to be in such a state. "What's coming?" Xiao Jingran had a strange expression on his face. When he looked at the guard, the nervousness in his heart inexplicably appeared in advance. "The beast tide. It's coming." "Very good. Many of the beasts are coming. All of them are coming." Just as the guard finished speaking, he heard a loud and clear wolf howl. The sound of the wolf howl had just started to ring out. Before Xiao Jingran could react, he heard the cries of various lions, tigers, jackals, and wolves ringing out one after another. The sound of their hooves stomping on the ground was so loud that a violent collision could be heard from the tightly shut city gate. Such a sturdy city gate could not withstand the crazy impact of the beast tide. It was so terrifying and ferocious. The soldiers on the city wall were so frightened that they panicked and turned to run. How could they still remember to fight back? The giant pythons and cheetahs all rushed up and stepped on the bodies of the rhinoceroses and elephants. They leaped onto the city wall, and the giant pythons even built a bridge. Xiao Jingran and Qin Bai trembled violently when they saw this scene. Only when they saw the beasts attacking the city with their own eyes did they know how terrifying it was. The most shocking thing was that the python that had built the bridge seemed to be waiting for something. Xiao Jingran and Qin Bai's eyes could not help but look in that direction. They looked at the bridge that the python had built. A figure slowly walked out from the bridge. She was dressed in bright red clothes and was very eye-catching. Her petite figure was slowly revealed, and she stepped on the python's bodies as she walked up step by step. Among the beasts, a pair of golden-green eyes were filled with a strong, murderous intent as they looked down on everything. Chapter 2099. Those eyes were so familiar. Qin Bai and Xiao Jingran looked at the person who appeared in front of them. That familiar face and those familiar eyes. It's her. In Qin Bai's heart, the moment he saw Jingyu, his heart couldn't help but skip a beat. It was so clear. Looking at Jingyu from afar, the emotions in his eyes were so clear. Qin Bai took a small step forward. He didn't even understand why his emotions were so strong. Gee! Just as Qin Bai took a small step forward, he suddenly heard an incomparably loud cry of an eagle. It resounded through the entire sky. That incomparably huge Taoist eagle was circling in the sky. Its huge mouth directly swept over the bayonet hanging at the top of the high platform. It opened its mouth and directly bit down on the rope. Little Potato sat on the high platform like a curious baby. He looked at the things in the sky and on the ground with a curious expression. "Little brother, what do you think that is?" Little Potato raised his head to look at the Taoist eagle circling in the sky and asked curiously. "Ah!" Little Watermelon opened his pair of dark green eyes and called out excitedly. Little Potato was silent. He forgot that his little brother couldn't completely speak yet. The two children sat on the high platform without any sense of danger. Their small bodies seemed to be very curious about everything they saw. The moment Jingyu stepped on the city wall, she saw the two children sitting on the high platform. Seeing that Little Potato and Little Watermelon were safe and sound, Jingyu's expression became a little better. The Taoist eagle circled above the heads of Xiao Jingran and the others. It suddenly flew over and lowered its body to the top of Jingyu's head. A figure jumped down from the Taoist eagle's back and landed steadily. The figure that stood up was so tall. After the figure landed, the Taoist eagle once again spread its wings and flew high into the sky. The figure that landed on the ground slowly turned around. His handsome face and eyes were filled with endless coldness. He looked at Xiao Jingran and Qin Bai, who were standing on a high platform. His sharp gaze was like an invisible blade. Who else could it be other than Xiao Chun? The moment Xiao Chun landed, the tightly shut city gates were knocked open. Countless ferocious beasts rushed in and tore apart the people in the city. In almost an instant, the entire city was occupied. The tiger and leopard leaped onto the high platform and pounced towards Xiao Jingran and Qin Bai. However, the moment it pounced, it stopped in its tracks and let out an earth-shattering roar towards the guards who were protecting Xiao Jingran. The guards were so shocked that the long sword in their hands fell to the ground. Their faces turned pale as they lost control of their bowels. Two gray wolves climbed onto the high platform and landed in front of Little Potato and Little Watermelon. The two gray wolves stared at the two children leisurely. Then, they opened their mouths and bit the children's clothes. Suddenly, they jumped down. Ha ha! When the two children saw the two gray wolves appear, They blinked their eyes curiously. They didn't seem to understand what they were when they were suddenly bitten by the two gray wolves. They were so frightened that they opened their small mouths and looked as if they were about to cry. However, before they could cry, they were amused by the action of jumping down. Immediately, their cries turned into laughter. They widened their eyes in amusement. Chapter 2100. As the two wolves leaped, they instantly arrived beside Jingyu and Xiao Chun. Little potato, little watermelon. Jingyu looked at the two children in front of her. She was pleasantly surprised and reached out to hold little watermelon in her arms. Xiao Chun naturally reached out to take little potato. Daddy! Little potato saw Xiao Chun and his eyes lit up in surprise. He hugged Xiao Chun's neck and didn't let go. Then he tilted his head and called out in a childish voice, "Mommy, are you okay?" Jingyu hurriedly checked the two children to see if they were injured. When she saw that the two children were safe and sound, she let out a deep sigh, as if she was relieved. She held the children in her arms and felt at ease. Little Potato said anxiously, "Auntie Lan and Auntie Chio have been taken away. Uncle Emperor has also been locked up." Little Potato opened his big eyes and said, "Let's go and beat up that bad uncle." Okay. Jingyu agreed. She was very happy to see Little Potato like this. "In Jian, In Feng, help me protect the children." Jingyu put little watermelon on In Feng's back and raised her hand to pat In Feng's head. She looked at the two wolves, and her eyes were filled with gentleness. "Oh!" In Feng lowered his head and rubbed Jingyu's hand. He glanced at the little guy on his back and walked to the side, step by step, away. Jingyu didn't want the two children to see such a bloody scene. In Jian and In Feng took the two children to hide in a corner. Jingyu saw that the two children were safe and sound. Then she turned her head to look at Xiao Jingran and the others. She waved her hand, and the Humvee flew down. It grabbed Jingyu and threw her in the direction of Xiao Jingran and the others. The wild silk on Jingyu's wrist was thrown out and firmly hooked onto the platform. Jingyu and Xiao Chun stood still. Beside them were the tigers and leopards. "You're back." Xiao Jingran looked at Jingyu, who was standing beside the tiger, and then looked at Xiao Chun, who was standing beside Jingyu. Suddenly, he felt that they were so dazzling. He didn't know who he was asking this question to. "We meet again." Jingyu stood at the edge of the platform and reached out her hand to pat the tiger's head. This ferocious tiger was very obedient under Jingyu's touch. It was so comfortable that it looked like a big cat. "I'm very happy to see that you're still alive." Jingyu's lips curled into a mocking smile. The coldness in her eyes made people's hearts tremble. A commotion came from the other side. Jingyu looked over and saw that Hao Yu had entered the city. In front of this group, there were Shangguan Linglan, Xiao Yuling, and a few others. Jingyu looked at this scene and nodded her head in satisfaction. It looked like they had found their people. "I only have one question." Xiao Jingran saw that Shangguan Linglan, Xiao Yuling, and the others had been found. He knew that he had lost miserably. He didn't even have the chance to attack. He had already lost. Jingyu calmly raised her eyebrows and looked at Xiao Jingran. "I only want to know why you still have your different pupils." No matter how hard Xiao Jingran racked his brains, he still couldn't figure out why Jingyu's children had already inherited the other pupils, but Jingyu still had the other pupils. He really couldn't understand. Chapter 2101. How could Xiao Jingran have lost without her strange pupils? The biggest variable in the current situation was Jingyu's strange pupils. How could Xiao Jingran accept this? Looking at the wild beasts in the city, Xiao Jingran turned his head and said with a deep gaze, "Xiao Zian already has strange pupils. Why do you still have strange pupils?" Xiao Jingran was really confused as he stared intently at Jingyu. Strange pupils? Jingyu narrowed her eyes slightly when she heard this. Then, a calm smile appeared on her face. She turned her head to look at Qin Bai, who was standing quietly at the side, and said, "Isn't there the Holy Family's high priest who claims to be able to predict the future here? He knows the reason for this. Why don't you ask him?" Jingyu's lips curled up slightly in amusement. The girl with strange pupils was lost in the Roman forest when she was still an infant. She left the mountain at the age of 7. No one saw her before she turned 7, and no one taught her. However, she knows martial arts and can speak. She is no different from an ordinary person. She knows how to deal with people and built restaurants and clothing stores. Ever since she returned to the Tokyo at the age of 14, she seems to be a wild girl who doesn't know any etiquette. However, in the Imperial City, her behavior is different from ordinary people. At first, I didn't understand why. Now, I think I understand. Qinbai looked calmly at Jingyu as he spoke. Understand what? Qinbai's words were exactly what Xiao Jingran was puzzled about. However, after Qinbai finished speaking, he didn't continue speaking. Instead, he stared quietly at Jingyu. His deep and quiet eyes stared directly at Jingyu. Is that world your world? Qinbai's eyes flashed with confusion as he looked at Jingyu curiously and asked, Since you've seen it, how can you not know? Jingyu smiled faintly and said happily, Now, do you know why? Qinbai seemed to be very helpless as he smiled faintly and said, I should have thought of it earlier. Unfortunately, Qinbai knew that he had already suspected it. However, those scenes were too strange. Even if Qinbai had seen it, he wouldn't dare to admit it. However, Jingyu was forced to admit it now. Nothing is absolute in this world. Strange pupils didn't exist in the past, but it doesn't mean that they can't exist in the future. Today will become history. Jingyu looked indifferently at Xiao Jingran indifferently and said, You are also a part of this history. Hearing Jingyu's words, his eyes narrowed. Jingyu's words were right. Today had indeed become the most colorful day in the history of this Tokyo. The wild tide of beasts surrounded the entire imperial city. They saw with their own eyes that the throne had been taken back. The figure standing among the beasts was so shocking. Xiao Jingran had been removed from the throne. He had been beheaded right at the entrance of the imperial palace as a traitor on the streets. Xiao Jingran was dressed in a prisoner's uniform as he knelt in front of the imperial palace. He looked up at the sky, at the house, and at the figure not far away. In a daze, he suddenly remembered that there was a time. Jingyu had entered the imperial palace to attend the tea party. She had hung on top of his sedan chair and refused to leave. He recalled Jingyu's every frown and smile, her strange words, and her joyful appearance. Xiao Jingran vaguely remembered that he had been very happy at that time. Chapter 21:02. It was just a short journey, but Xiao Jingran felt very happy. At this moment, Xiao Jingran suddenly understood why he always wanted the throne. It seemed like there was a moment when he didn't want the throne anymore. He only wanted the throne because he wanted to suppress Xiao Chun and make her look at him. But her gaze never stopped on him. But there was nothing left for him along the way. At the moment of his death, Xiao Jingran was suddenly at a loss. He didn't understand what he wanted. He originally thought that at the moment of his death, he would think of resentment and regret. However, he didn't expect that he would think of what happened in the imperial palace. The short time he spent with Jingyu. Xiao Jingran's gaze was incomparably complicated. A feeling of regret spread in his heart. He didn't regret that he didn't get the throne. He regretted that he didn't treat her gently in the past. It was noon. Jingyu stood not far away and watched with her own eyes as Xiao Jingran's head fell to the ground. Looking at the bright red blood flowing down the steps, she suddenly felt a little sad. The blood-stained palace was once again stained with the blood of a prince. Looking at the ground, Jingyu really wanted to lift the stone slab to see if the ground under the stone slab was red. All the rebels were killed. The beast tide also retreated. After the prince's residence was slightly renovated, Jingyu and Xiao Chun moved in again. The two children played happily with Injian and Infeng, but Infeng seemed to be bored to death. Looking at him, they wondered if he was sick. 5 to 6 days later, Xiaobai returned with a large group of soldiers. The palace, which had been baptized by the flames of war again, needed a long time to recover and reassure the people. On the day Xiaobai returned, news came from the dungeon in the palace. Qinbai is dying. When Jingyu heard the news, she widened her eyes in shock. How could he let Qinbai die so easily? When Jingyu heard the news, she immediately went to call for help. At the same time, she went to the dungeon in the palace. Although it was called a dungeon, it was more like a small underground room. The room was exquisitely decorated. Qinbai was lying on the bed. When Jingyu came in and saw Qinbai, her eyes widened in shock when she saw Qinbai's white hair. White hair? Jingyu probably didn't expect Qinbai's hair to suddenly turn white. The person sitting beside Qinbai's bed was a young man. Jingyu looked at Zuo's familiar face and recognized him at a glance. Other than Zuo growing taller, there was not much change in his facial features. Master has divined too many heavenly secrets and exhausted all his efforts. Now, there is nothing he can do. Zuo didn't turn his head, but he knew that Jingyu must have arrived. Even the gods can't save him now that his heart's blood has dispersed. Zuo spoke again, not to mention the people from Miracle Physician Valley. Jingyu opened her mouth. She really wanted to ask the people from Miracle Physician Valley to give it a try, but she didn't expect Zuo's words to make her swallow her words. The last person Master wanted to see is you. Zuo stood up and turned to look at Jingyu and said, "Maybe you don't want to see him." Zuo took a deep look at Jingyu before he walked out of the dungeon and waited quietly. Chapter 2103. Jingyu frowned deeply as she looked at Zuo's receding figure. She seemed to be thinking about something before she turned to look at the bed. Qinbai was lying on the bed, wearing a simple inner garment. His face was as pale as a ghost. Jingyu looked at Qinbai's white hair, and a strange feeling rose in her heart. She frowned deeply as she looked at Qinbai's familiar face. Qinbai slowly opened his eyes. When he turned his head, he saw Jingyu standing beside the bed. His eyes widened, and he lowered his head in silence. "Why are you here?" he asked in a hoarse voice. His voice carried a strong sense of calmness. "Oh, I heard that you're about to die, so I came to see if you're really dead," Jingyu replied flatly as she curled her lips coldly. When Qinbai heard Jingyu's words, he felt his breath freeze. He could not speak for a long time. Soon, Qinbai leaned forward and looked at Jingyu indifferently. "I just want to ask, who is number 9? You don't have the right to know." Jingyu turned her head away in annoyance when she heard Qinbai's question. It seemed like she did not want to hear Qinbai mention that name. Qinbai turned his head away silently and did not say anything. The room fell into a short silence. Jingyu even wanted to turn around and leave. "Jingyu, I'm sorry," Jingyu suddenly said when she was about to turn around and leave. Jingyu froze in her tracks. With her back facing Qinbai, she could not see Qinbai's expression clearly. "If I could do it all over again, I would definitely not use you." Qinbai stared deeply at Jingyu's back. In a trance, he seemed to recall the first time he met Jingyu. The girl standing in the bushes with her longbow drawn and her dark eyes looking at him worriedly. Her eyes were so dazzling. Qinbai stared deeply at Jingyu's back. "I will never forgive you. Your apology is worthless." Jingyu sneered and left without hesitation. Qinbai stood there in a daze as he watched Jingyu's back disappear into the dungeon. However, he did not look away. He looked at the door and suddenly laughed. He was laughing at himself for being so pathetic. Perhaps the Holy Family could have become the #1 holy family in the world. As for the fiancée that was supposed to be his, perhaps she would become his wife. Even if she wasn't his wife, she would definitely become his best friend. But now everything was ruined. Qinbai slowly closed his eyes and lay quietly on the bed. All he could think of was how Jingyu had protected him in the forest, and how she had treated him quietly in the cave at the bottom of the deep pool. At that time, the way she looked at him was so beautiful, that he could not help but be moved. "Master." Zuo's voice rang in his ears. Qinbai wanted to open his eyes, but he realized that he was powerless. He had no strength to open his eyes. "Master." Zuo shouted in horror as he looked at Qinbai, who was bleeding from his 7 apertures. However, he was met with endless silence. The handsome man lying on the bed had lost all signs of life. Qinbai was dead. He had peeped into too many mysteries and wasted his blood essence. His body was already in tatters. Chapter 2104. He had already reached his limit. Xuan knew that, but he did not expect Qinbai to leave so soon. Jingyu received the news of Qinbai's death as soon as she stepped out of the palace gates. Jingyu's eyes widened slightly, and then she slowly regained her composure. She did not feel happy, nor did she feel the joy of her enemy's death. When she heard the news, she only felt a sense of calm. She calmly felt that this was how it should be. Jingyu smiled indifferently. Madam, what should we do with Qinbai's disciples? 15th interrogation officer followed beside Jingyu and asked in a conflicted tone. Xuan. Jingyu pursed her lips slightly and thought seriously for a moment. Then she turned her head and said, Lock him up. I won't kill him. If he wants to die, then let him be buried together with Qinbai. Jingyu turned and left after saying this. 15th interrogation officer repeated Jingyu's words to the guards, and then he followed Jingyu out of the palace. The moment they stepped into Prince Yu's mansion, they heard a clamor. Jingyu was puzzled as to why it was so lively in Prince Yu's mansion. When she stepped into the mansion, she saw Shangwan Linglan, Xing'er, and a group of children. Linglan, Miaoqiu, why are you here? Jingyu asked in surprise. Shangwan Linglan and Lu Miaoqiu both turned their heads. When they saw Jingyu, their eyes were filled with smiles. Miaoqiu, you are now the empress. How can you come out as you please? Jingyu said in surprise. What are you afraid of? Lu Miaoqiu smiled calmly. She looked at Jingyu and said, The palace is in a mess now. The emperor is very happy that I came out of Prince Yu's mansion. After all, Prince Yu's mansion is the safest place now. Jingyu's mouth twitched when she heard this. Was that so? Jingyu, look at these children. Jingyu looked at the open space and saw that there was a very soft cushion. The cushion was very big, and on the cushion, the 4 children were having a lot of fun. Little Potato was the most articulate. Little Watermelon and the Crown Prince were sitting on the ground and crawling around. They obviously cannot speak. No, they were not able to speak clearly. They are really gathered together. Jingyu's mouth twitched. Jingyu's 2 sons, Lu Miaoqiu's son, Jinglang's daughter, and Shangwan Linglan's 2 children were playing together. This scene was truly incomparably shocking. Little Potato, don't pull your crown prince's leg. Just as Shangwan Linglan was about to speak to Jingyu Escher, she saw Little Potato pulling Xiao Tianyu's little feet with a curious expression on his face. Mother, Crown Prince's leg is the same as mine. Little Potato looked at Jingyu and said seriously. Everyone's face darkened. Jingyu ordered the servants to look after these children. Then, she followed Lu Miaoqiu and Xiao Chun to the main hall and sat down slowly. When a maid served tea, Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu and asked, Is there any news about Qinbai? Qinbai is dead. Jingyu looked at Xiao Chun silently, and then lowered her head. Chapter 2105. Dead. Xiao Chun widened his eyes in shock when he heard Jingyu's words. Yes, Jingyu replied, and casually picked up the cup of tea on the table. With a solemn expression on her face, she said, It's a good thing that he's dead. I think the news will be announced soon. Now it's finally safe. Jingyu stared at the door. Outside the door, she could vaguely hear the laughter of children. What are your plans from now on? Jingyu snapped out of her daze when she heard Shangwan Linglan's question. She turned to look at Shangwan Linglan. Shangwan Linglan's expression didn't change. Even the look in his eyes didn't seem to change. Jingyu looked at Shangwan Linglan and suddenly smiled. That bright smile made Jingyu confused. What did you just say? That was so funny. I want to bring the child to see my parents when he grows up, Jingyu said leisurely. Jingyu had mentioned this matter many times. However, due to various reasons, it was delayed time and time again. However, Jingyu had never forgotten that she wanted to go. Shangwan Linglan nodded slowly when he heard Jingyu's words. In the prince's mansion, Jingzhan's name was engraved on the memorial tablet. However, in the Roman forest, his name wasn't engraved on the tombstone. It was normal for Jingyu to have such thoughts. That afternoon, Jingyu, Xiao Chun, and many other people sat in the courtyard. Little Potato and a group of children were playing happily. The world seemed to have fallen silent. It was as if the entire world had been baptized in the flames of war. That year's chaos settled down as time passed. It didn't disappear from everyone's sight. Instead, the various stories between the Ninth Emperors and the Ninth Imperial Concubine were written into a very interesting book. There were even portraits of the Ninth Emperors and the Ninth Imperial Concubine. The story was vividly written and was widely popular. 3 years later, the Ninth Emperor's mansion was still as glorious as ever. At the entrance of the mansion, the guards stood ramrod straight like javelins. A tall figure alighted from a carriage. He was dressed in black robes embroidered with ink-red totems. The man who turned his head sideways had sharp brows and bright eyes. "Lord Crown Prince, we're here." Interrogation Officer 11 stood beside Xiao Bai and bowed to him respectfully. "Father and mother have left." Xiao Bai's voice had a faint magnetism to it. On his handsome face, there was a majestic aura. Xiao Bai's name was now known all over the world. "Tokyo heir, Xiao Bai." "Yes, Master and Madam have left." Interrogation Officer 11 replied respectfully. "They're finally gone." Xiao Bai's eyes darkened. He obviously looked unhappy, but the words he said made it seem as if he couldn't wait for Xiao Chun and Jingyu to leave. "Gather the guards. I have something to say." Xiao Bai curled his lips coldly. There was a hint of evil in his dark eyes, which made Interrogation Officer 11 shiver inexplicably. He didn't know why, but he had a very bad feeling about this. A feeling that he was going to lose his job. Jingyu and Xiao Chun didn't know what Xiao Bai was doing. On the tree-lined road, a luxurious carriage was traveling on the road. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.